what I had in mind for my talk today was to just explain these two concepts, first landscape and then literature, and try to make some connection between these two. And from coming from general connection between landscape and literature, then arriving at the more specific part, which is the Chota Nagpur Plateau, and then maybe we could wind it all up. And maybe I could read one poem to just show how this connection that I try to make. I am very thankful to Mangalam ma'am for bringing up the photography aspect in my work as well, because I was a bit apprehensive whether I should talk about it, whether I should keep it back. But now that it has been brought up, then it has only opened one more avenue for me to get into, and through which I can explain better. So when we think of literature, when we think of landscape, there are two things. First is the land, which is the geography. So there is any given stretch of land, and it could be a plateau, it could be a plain, it could be beach, it could be mountain. And then we come to this word called landscape, which is a function of perception. So it depends that what one individual is seeing or perceiving in that given land. And therefore, because each individual is different, so no landscape is similar. A landscape, as a matter of perception, is a very creative perception as well. And poetry, literature, it works through this creativity. Now, usually when we say the word landscape, what comes to our mind is scenery, good looking vistas, or as they call in Hindi, Urdu, Nazara. Uh, when I go to forest villages in Hazaribagh to photograph, then the villagers, the teenage boys who get very excited to see my long camera, so they come to me and then they say कि आप scene बना रहे हैं, as if I am making the scene, right? And this is very important, right? And this is what I wanted to focus on, that scene banane aaye hain aap. Take. So it is not that the scene exists before, it is that the scene has to be made. And who is the one making it? The photographer is the one making it. And later, the poet will be the one making it. So, and landscape is also not just simply a matter of aesthetic, that, okay, I see a good view and that is landscape. I want you to think landscape in a more complex way. I want you to think landscape in terms of history and especially public policy. What I mean here is that what I mean to say that landscape is historical, that there are various shifts and changes that occur through a specific landscape. I'll give you one example. There is one yojana which the government of India has for villages. It is called the Pradhan Mantri Gramin Sadak Yojana, which is PM Rural Roads Development scheme. So what happens there is that under the scheme, far-flung villages are connected by roads. Now, say for example that there is a plateau, and plateau, as we know, it has a flat top. And for the longest time, of course, there is a village on top of the plateau, but there was no road. So for the longest time, the only way to reach that village would be by taking the forest trail, these narrow desire paths that crisscross through the escarpment of the plateau. Then a road was built. And when the road was built, what happened was that certain stretches of the plateau was cleared out. Some trees were felled. And what these felling of the trees resulted in one particular stretch was opening of the view, right? So if I am going up the hill and if I am taking the road which is a forest path, then I cannot see beyond the trees, right? Because it is so forested. But if a road comes in, and while bringing the road inside of the plateau, some trees have to be felled, then the view becomes more complete, so to say. Then the view opens up. So landscape in this regard is not innocent. Landscape happens not only in terms of my own eyes, but it also happens in terms of what is written in the files and what is signed by the secretaries and the directors of various government agencies. So landscape in that regard is very bureaucratic. It is also very political because it is in the end the parliament which is passing the laws. Landscape is also historical, right? And it is historical in the sense that there are various ways in which a land has been perceived. And I'm going to give you one example that how, okay, I'll come to the how later, but I'll give you one example. Binoy here is from Hazaribagh slash Dhanbad, right? And I'm from Hazaribagh. And when I speak with Binoy about Hazaribagh, what Binoy remembers of Hazaribagh is the people, and what I remember of Hazaribagh is the land. And when he talks, and if I had to talk to him about Dhanbad, then I don't, because I don't have friends in Dhanbad. So Dhanbad is not about people. Dhanbad is about coal. Dhanbad is about the mines. Dhanbad is about the waterfalls that are existing in the far-flung regions of that district. So there is this very basic difference that we share in the way that we view our hometowns and the Chota Nagpur Plateau in general. Now, I would like to take your attention to this film called Gangs of Wasipur, right? One of the, I don't know, many handful of films that have taken Jharkhand as a representing subject, as a subject worthy of representation, right? And and what we see in Gangs of Wasipur is the depiction of Dhanbad as a criminal center, as a very dark place, as a dark in a very Bihari subversive way. Uh, it it is correct. It is a bit exaggerated also, but we can't say that it doesn't happen. It does happen, but there is another kind of Dhanbad, and just keep this point in your mind for a bit, that there is another kind of Dhanbad. Similarly, there is a web series called Jamtada, and Jamtada is again on Chota Nagpur Plateau, and it is a neighboring district to Dhanbad. And Jamtada is a very beautiful place actually. I've driven through Jamtada, but what Netflix would have us believe is that Jamtada is filled with scammers, that they will call you and they will take your credit card information. Uh, Similarly, if I have to ask someone in Delhi about Jharkhand, uh, and if it is, say, for example, someone who is 16-year-old, 18-year-old, 23 years old, at least it happened with me when I was in college, the maximum stretch of imagination that would go is to MS Dhoni. So the Jharkhand means Dhoni, and Dhoni is Ranchi. So that's where it all ends. Now, let's I want to talk a bit about how history records things. I'm reading Hind Swaraj in my coursework at IIT Delhi, and there's this very nice thing that Gandhi says, that history is very one-sided. That history records disruptions in human peace. History records wars. History records, okay, this kingdom was usurped by that king, or that kingdom was usurped by someone else. These two clans went on war. And Gandhi says that if you read history, you will think that humanity is always fighting. But it is not so. If humanity was always fighting, then there wouldn't be so many people alive today. So the very fact that there are so many people alive today points that history misses certain things. And what history misses is according to Gandhi, is the general non-violence that exists among people. So what I'm trying to say is that while history is recording Jharkhand in terms of the blackness of Dhanbad, it is recording Jharkhand in terms of the scammers that are there in Jamtada, or the perception that Jharkhand is Dhoni, or the perception that Jharkhand is a Naxal infested state battling insurgency. It is a poor state. It is a state where there is very little education. It performs poorly on almost all indices. All of this is true, and all of this is recorded by history. But Another thinker that comes to my mind is Aristotle. And if we go back to Aristotle's The Poetics, he draws a distinction between poetry and history. And he privileges poetry because poetry carries potentiality. This, I think, is my work as a poet. That my work is to harvest the potentiality that poetry carries and perhaps try to reconcile poetry with history. Not to see poetry and history as two different things, but where history is failing, where history is telling you that Jharkhand is poor, Jharkhand is unlivable, or whatnot, is filled with scammers, criminals, there is this perception being generated, then my responsibility through my work as a photographer and a poet, as a photographer to show you the picturesque side of Jharkhand because I work in landscape photography, and as a poet to tell you that yes, while the people were blown apart by insurgency, and while we were also joking, just like Aruni said, that अच्छा इतने ही लोग मरे हैं, ज़्यादा नहीं हुआ. So while this was happening, there were people who were going into the forest looking for bird calls. There were people falling in love in Dhanbad. There were people going about their businesses, right? So this is the kind of, you can say, politics that I try to bring into my work. And this is how I understand Jharkhand in terms of history on one side and in terms of poetry on the other, and me in between. Because as a researcher who is again working on Chota Nagpur, so it's not just that as a writer I am working on Chota Nagpur, but my research area is pretty much the same. I was joking with my friend that for my research, you can say that I'm studying myself. So it's interesting to see that how as a researcher and how as a poet or as a creative perceiver of land, how these two often collide, and how there are, of course, there are resonances in terms of thematic area, but there are various what can you say, there are various disruptions as well. Because what I can do as a poet and what I can say as a poet, perhaps that I will not find in documented archives, which I have to look up for my research. So my work in general as a poet and a photographer has been to reconcile through me these two aspects of Jharkhand. Now let's come to the plateau per se, because that's what I wanted to focus on. Now there is I can immediately qualify plateau through the rhetoric of a marginalized landscape, because if there say for example, if someone has to go to a beautiful place, then they go to the Himalayas, they go to Uti or the Nilgiris, or the sea beaches, right? If someone has to go to a pilgrimage, then they go to the plains of North India. There are so many pilgrim centers along the Ganga. But when I say plateau, then I remember a friend of mine, she said that, अच्छा plateau वो होता है ना जो पहाड़ बनना चाहता है लेकिन नहीं बन पाता है. So the plateau is something that aspires to be a mountain, but unfortunately it doesn't become a mountain. Now, this is a false way of seeing the plateau. Plateau does not aspire to be a mountain. Plateau is flat, elevation flat. This is the nature of the plateau. And I came to plateau, came to understand or appreciate plateau at the time when my life itself had plateaued. So you can, if Binoy and Aruni would remember that I started out very nicely as a poet, winning awards and fellowships and everything, publishing my own book. And all of this happened by the time I was 23 years old. And sometimes I look back and I was like, it was too rapid. And after 23 years old, there was this sense of stagnation that, okay, so what do I do now? So I went into the industry. I took up a job in advertising and I became a copywriter. So I wrote jingles for buckets, mugs, Airtel, DLF, all these companies. I made copy for tourism resorts and everything. It was only that after working in advertising for a year, and after realizing that yes, there is one way to perceive the land, and there's another way to write, just in the way that marketers do, just in the way that advertisers do, right? That there is a way to package it. Now, I'm not saying that I'm packaging Plateau in as a product, but I cannot deny that advertising influence, that it gave me certain tool in order to articulate the Plateau better, which I didn't have before. Because I was seriously academic before. I was only college student, then fellowship. If it weren't for the advertising experience, then I would have been in the academic system. And I really think that that experience helped me open up a bit, because academia could be a cocoon at in sometimes, like there is this criticism that is leveled against academia, that we live in our ivory tower and we are detached from ground reality. So I did see ground reality, but what that led what that led to was that I ended up becoming more and more mentally unstable, because my heart was in the plateau, and I wanted to be in Hazaribagh. I wanted to explore the plateau more, and and by the time it was 2016, the end of 2016, I almost had a mental breakdown. I was going through this intense period of depression. uh, I consulted with a psychotherapist, with a psychiatrist. Both said that, Mihir, you have to go home. So Mihir went home. So I came to Jharkhand. I came to Hazaribagh in 2017, and as a distraction, because I could not sit with myself alone in the house. I didn't have any job. So, as a distraction, I started going into the forest more. And slowly and steadily, I started trusting the forest. That is very important, that you have to trust your forest. We don't trust forest. We're like, झाड़ झक्कड़ में कौन जाएगा, वहां मत जाओ, वहां जंगल है, वहां सांप होगा. These are the kinds that they are the talk that our elders, our family members, they tell us. But and this comes from this binary that we have created, which comes from enlightenment tradition of Western philosophy, that nature versus man, not man in nature, but man and nature. Right? And consolidated later through industrial revolution and this kind of neoliberal times that we are living in, where nature becomes a product, that man goes to nature, takes certain things from it, and comes back to his own shelter. So this kind of breaching of the wall between man and nature, this is what I did from 2017 to 2019, these 2 years. And this is something, these 2 years I did it full time, so to say. And now I do it part time because of the studies and everything. These 2 years, when I was a full time student of the Plateau landscape, I took courses in Plateau landscape. Let's just say it that way. So I took courses in archaeology, and I understood that people had lived in the plateau since time immemorial, since the prehistoric ages. They left evidence of their habitation in form of rock arts, in form of megalithic sites. And if we come to Buddhist period, there was a report in the Indian Express just yesterday that they found a Buddhist site in Hazaribagh, and I was involved with the early stage of excavation with the team. So as and then you understand that the Buddhist monks would have this tradition of going into the forest uh, to meditate. The Jain monks have this tradition of walking long distances, going much deeper into the forest in order to meditate, right? And when I arrived in Hazaribagh, battling my own mental health and depression, uh, I also wanted to meditate. So it was only natural that my feet just took me into the forest. Just like Aruni hears stories, My feet. I usually tell people that I didn't know what I was doing. It was just frenzy. I would wake up, get in the car, drive to the nearest forest, park the car on the road, and just get in. And I would have no clue where I was going. Thankfully, I'm good with directions, so I would remember that I came from this side, I came from that side, and then I would come back and reach home at 5 in the evening, have my evening snack, have my dinner, write something, go to sleep, and repeat the same thing for 2 years. This was kind of my therapy. So, and when people say that, okay, when you go to when you are taking photographs of nature, or when you are showing us these beautiful sights of the plateau, and you are not showing us the kachada side of the plateau, you are not showing us the ground reality of the plateau, the struggles. And so what I was saying, that there is this criticism that sometimes is leveled against me, that you're not showing the actual Jharkhand, because according to history, actual Jharkhand is people dying. Actual Jharkhand is, people living in abject poverty. Uh, it is the blackness of coal. It is people not getting justice. And yes, it is all there. But when when in the time when our forests are decreasing, in the time when the government is so hell-bent on just doing away with any pretense of environmental conservation, photographing hills and trees and streams when the rivers are being dammed needlessly, then photographing these last natural resources, these last natural features, for me is a very radical act, because no one else is doing this. So everyone, there is like I keep coming back to Aruni, just like Aruni's editor would tell him, Sanjeev, that why are you not writing about violence, more violence? So it's like that, because the perception of Jharkhand is that why are you not writing about the Naxal insurgency, or why are you not writing about the इतने ज्यादती होते हैं हमारे आदिवासी समाज में. First, I am not, and like I don't think that I should write about the struggles faced by the Adivasi community. At least I should not take that voice from them. It is theirs to write. एंड रिगार्डिंग कि आप नहीं बताते हैं कि यहाँ पर इतनी गरीबी है, ये है, वो है. आई मीन जस्ट गूगल, you will see it. You don't need another writer telling the same, saying the same narrative. So if I have to say something, I would rather give you a different narrative. I would rather offer you that consolation which you don't get from history. And when I said that, when Aristotle said that poetry contains potentiality, that this is the particular potentiality that I want to work with, and this is something that I am working with. Uh, I would like to end here with a poem, and before reading the poem, I would also like to say that landscape is not just taking photographs or writing about natural scenery, but landscape encompasses everything that is there on the land. So it is city also. So Delhi people need not worry that it's only when they come to the plateau that is how they are going to see landscape, or only when they go to Shimla then they will see landscape. No, no, no. Landscape is everywhere. It's how you frame it. It's how you perceive it. So I gave the example of Dhanbad uh, when I was talking about the city in Jharkhand. So the poem that I'm going to read, and this poem is based on Dhanbad. So I'm working on this series of poems where I write a poem which is inspired by one specific place. So this poem is Dhanbad, and the title of this poem is Present. Uh, so I'll just read it, and read it very slowly. Present. General knowledge that I had never really liked the mess, that beneath the surface the earth was burning, that one wrong move would destroy the body, Yet it was right. Soft dusk, stubborn traffic, futile heckling on the road. I know tonight that besides fire, you are also a city, and a city to an escaping heart is a comforter. It was suddenly so easy to see you, you a former abstraction, warning me of smoke, residue of water spread across your land. I was so little against your saturation. For a present, I gave you a rock that I picked from a stream, watching you amused at its layers, zigzag of its cuts. A tiny waterfall, for short time, an eternal monument. That it rest still where I had kept it the first time is an evidence of goodwill. That it stays so longer, my hope. For I am not the first one, or I am not the first rock to melt on your soil. I am hardly also the last. So, Mangala ma'am may have just picked up that Spencer reference for a short time, an endless monument, which occurred with Epithalamion.
There are
And
so many echoes now.
and this I find magical. I mean, there is. I'm not to sing my own praise, but poets are thoda sa narcissist. So sometimes I think about it and like, who is going to write this from Jharkhand if not me? Who is going to bring Spencer into Dhanbad if not me? And this is the kind of reconciliation that I was talking about. That uh, there is a coal city which figures in national newspapers as the city which has a ground which is always burning because there is underground fire going on in the city. So anytime that city is going to just collapse. And then there is this lover of the city. And this is not the lover of the forest and the land and everything, which I was talking about before. But this is the lover who looks at the land and looks at the coal and who pines for that heat, who pines for that contact. And he acknowledges that he is not the first one to melt on the surface. And he acknowledges that in this huge fire, and what he had to offer was just this silly rock, which he had picked up from the stream, like I pick up pebbles from streams. Uh, and he gave that silly rock to this coal town, which is always burning, aware that at any time that rock can melt. And then he returns to the town once more and sees that where he had put the rock, it's still there. And for that, for him, uh, that moment where he sees that the rock is still there after, say for example, 2 years, and without disappearing, without going into the fire below, that for a short time is an endless monument, right? And that just like Spencer says about marriage and that wedding day, that of course, aage jaakar it's all going to be routine, but for that one day, that epiphany that comes, that yes, it is endless, it is eternal. So this is what I try to do through my poetry. And so when I say that representing the Chota Nagpur plateau through poetry, this is pretty much my methodology or the framework through which I operate. Thank you.